Hi everyone, I hope everyone's doing really well. Welcome to this lecture, which is on landscapes. I hope this theme is of interest to you. I hope it inspires you to read a little bit more around the subject and equally to develop maybe a deeper appreciation of landscapes as and when you encounter them. And they take many different guises, as I'll be talking about later on. So as you can see, Christmas is very much on our agenda here. I'm recording this from the Emerald Centre Library, which is in Leicester, and colleagues there very kindly enabled me to use this space for all my lecture recordings, so I would very much like to thank them. I will introduce you to all of our special guest speakers. So let me just move the camera a little bit. I don't know if you can see who's perched there on the windowsill, so thank you, St. Nicholas, for finding the time out of your very busy schedule, or maybe not quite so busy because obviously that gets busier as the approach to Christmas accelerates. So welcome, and just to keep the festive spirit alive and well. So let's talk about the really fascinating theme of landscapes. I do want to mention my colleague Karen Ben-Villet, who many of you may know, who has very kindly enabled me to use some of her materials on landscapes. So this lecture is a combination of Karen's materials and my own materials. And maybe you could play a guessing game to guess who did what section of the lecture. So let me tell you what I'm planning to cover. So we will be looking at different aspects of landscape: physical landscapes, imagined landscapes, experienced landscapes, spatial landscapes. So the way that we frame landscapes will enable us to begin to develop an appreciation and understanding, assign meanings to different forms of landscapes. And of course, much as we talk about these different types of landscapes, there are many interconnections along the way. We'll also talk about constructed landscapes, what they mean, landscapes as experienced phenomenologically by ourselves from the point of view of human beings as human subjects, and what that means to us in terms of construction of our own identity. And I have a little exercise which I would like you to do, which hopefully will kind of bring that point home very clearly. And then to explore a little bit more about the sort of demarcation between spatial, existential landscapes, personal and cultural landscapes. Also, I have a quiz which I'm going to flag up in a moment, which everyone is open to everyone to do. It's a fun quiz, and I will put all the winning entries into a hat and draw out one, and the winner will get a little collection of special prizes that I've been popping to one side these last few weeks, and I think they need a good home. I think it's very, very timely, and no time like the present. So, aspects of landscapes. Going to be talking about physical landscape, imagined landscape, experienced landscape, and constructed landscape. Those four key themes to anchor our lecture here today. Before I do that, I'm planning to record a separate video on what are generally known as myriorama, polyorama, endless landscapes. Now these are essentially this is one of the endless landscapes. I'll just pop it up to the camera, you can look at it a little bit closer. And here's another one based on a Dutch landscape. And as the video, which I'll record in a bit, will show, these are essentially a series of cards. I'll show you the first one. Small cards. In this pack, there's 24 of them, I think. And when you put them all together, no matter what way you put the card in, it creates an uninterrupted imagined landscape. And these are really, I mean, they're fun, but they're also really instructive. And I'll talk about those in my separate film. So we've got two to choose from. And I think I'll probably go with this Dutch one because it links to sustainable communities. But this was a concept that was developed in France in the 1820s and became popular throughout that period. Very hard to get these cards now, by the way. I bought them years ago, and I've since found out that they're out of print. So I feel very fortunate to still have them. And what is just astonishing is that there is something like, and you can see that vast number underneath. There's, I mean, just so many combinations that you can come up with of this endless landscape. And I will leave you to read this astonishingly large number, which is underneath. But, you know, who's counting, really? The main thing is that, you know, lots of fun. And it's got an educational purpose as well. So let's look at physical landscapes. And by physical landscapes, primarily, we're talking about the point of view from the point of view of geology, geomorphology, ecology, and habitats. These are all terms that you will have covered on the course, particularly in your first year. But we're also talking about the impact that that people have made on the world. You know, the extent to which settlements are governed by, you know, buildings, transport infrastructure, amenities, and so on. So Ermischer describes the physical landscape as the sum of all the aspects, natural, cultural, geographic, geological, biologic, artistic, whatever we can think of. According to that definition, we're concerned with a little bit more than the physical, but we will be coming back to those other dimensions of landscape. So often when people construct landscape, the first thing that they think of is the physical attributes of landscape. And that's a very good starting point to enter us into a more deeper discussion about the other, maybe more latent aspects of landscape. So I mentioned at the beginning that there's a quiz. I've got a series of images here. Let me just put myself up into the up corners of the screen. So during the course of this film, I will show you 8 images in total. I'd like you to go away and do some research and see if you can email me the answers for all 8 images. Where are these landscapes? Now, this particular slide here foregrounds more physical landscapes. Some of them you may already know instantly, others you may need to go away and just do a little bit of research on. You know, analyze the photo, see what you can see inside the photo. What does that tell you? And I have a little collection of prizes that I'd very much like to post to the winning person. All winning entries will go into a hat, and I'll draw out one, and then that'll be really nice to be able to do something which is a little bit fun too, as we're coming up to Christmas. So obviously you can go back and look at these images and do some research, and just also reflect on what these images say to you, how you feel when you're looking at them. Imagined landscapes, you know, the landscapes of the mind. A human being perceives a landscape and forms their ideas about their environs, you know, turning the environment into a landscape. So we may have the kind of the more physical, more spatial attributes of landscapes, but what they mean to us is something that we construct in our geographical imaginations. So with just a few more imagined landscapes. So we've got images 5, 6, 7, and 8 from a variety of different imagined landscapes. Again, do have a look. You may instantly know some of them. Others you may need to go away and just do a little bit more research on and see what you can come up with. And looking forward to receiving everyone's entries. So have fun doing that, guys. The experience landscape. Landscape is an area as perceived by people, the character of which is a result of the action and interaction of natural and human factors. Again, quite a rich definition of what landscapes are as provided by the European Landscape Convention. Stubbelar and Pedroli point to the perceived uniqueness of a place. Again, they're beginning to kind of point to this more phenomenologically experienced dimension of landscape. So at this point, I'm going to pause the video, pause the recording in a second, and I would like you to think of a landscape you have experienced. It could be anywhere. It could be literal, it could be physical, it could be, you know, it could be musical, it could be literary, it could be imagined. I mean, just anywhere. Just close your eyes and have a think about a landscape and just try and describe how it feels to be there. sometimes making that connection between our word, the thoughts we have in our heads, and our vocabulary to accurately represent those words. Sometimes that can be tricky. So give yourself a little bit of time just to think and feel what landscape means, and ask yourself what do you remember most and why. So I'll see you in a few minutes. Okay, so I hope you were able to think of a landscape that's particularly important to you, maybe somewhere that's special to you, somewhere you feel maybe a sense of peace or a sense of happiness or a sense of attachment to place. So we'll be talking about this a little bit more during the course of the seminar. So landscape and identity, people attribute landscape identity to an area. So what we bring to bear on an area can be just as important as what an area brings to us. So our own values, our own beliefs, our own ways of thinking, our morality, our own ethics, all influence how we engage with that landscape. And this is a very personal um, sentiment or a very personal feeling. Stubble and Pedroli talk about the landscape identity circle. On the next slide, I will explain to you what that is, but it's a really, I think, a very compact way for us to conceptualize landscape, as it enables us to begin to construct our own interpretation of landscape. So what does this actually mean? And how does this kind of interaction between people and place manifest? And as we've noted, there are a huge variety of landscapes across a range of disciplines. So if we look at some attributes of physical landscapes, so this is the column which is on the left-hand side of the table. Sometimes we may talk about, landscape ecology, agronomy, spatial planning, environmental disciplines, archaeological, and so on. So these very physical attributes. In the middle column, experience landscape, landscape architecture, where people try and sort of shape a landscape to so as that it becomes, congruent with someone's vision, possibly of it. And here we have disciplines like environmental psychology, sociology, philosophy, ethics, historical geography, cultural, human, and so on. And how that links with place. Imagined landscape. Again, we draw on our imaginations, most commonly linked with cultural geography, but also anthropology, literature arts, photography, and place. So just a way for us to begin to develop typologies for different forms of landscape, then to begin to reflect ourselves on what they actually mean. Landscapes are generally depicted as having positive attributes, but of course, landscapes can be equally negative. For example, it's really interesting that the comic book industry began in the USA in 1940s to try and mitigate people's concerns about urban panic, urban fear. So superhero characters, including characters like the Daredevil in uh, uh, in a fictional version of Hell's Kitchen in New York, were brought in as protectors of urban areas. So, there are various different devices that people have used over the years to try and address people's concerns if people are feeling excluded. Urban areas in the evening, at night, can be a particular source of fear for many, many groups. Going back to Stubler and Pedroli, landscape identity changes under the influence of changing context. The balance of power amongst stakeholders may shift, their aims can change, new players step up to the line, and new functions become important. So this, landscapes have a dynamic that they do change over time. So I mentioned the landscape identity circle, and it just gives us really good insights into landscapes per se. So without further ado, let me show you what that is. I'm apologizing for the quality of the diagram here, but it is from an original textbook. But if you do zoom in, you can read the text fairly easily without compromising the quality of the images too much. So As you can see, we have this sort of demarcation between personal, cultural, existential, and spatial. Existential, existential, related to things, the way that we feel at any one point in time. We're human, so we exist in the world. Sometimes people talk about existential angst. It may be a term that you've come across before, um, largely derived from philosophical writings. People like Albert Camus, for example, French philosopher in um, um, the uh, the 1940s and 1950s, wrote quite extensively about existential angst, is where we sort of question our validity and our role in the world and our purpose, the purpose of life in essence. So do have a look at that a bit more closely, because this will, really, I think, give you a very compact way to begin to interrogate landscapes in a meaningful and reflective and theoretical way. And just to flag the spatial and the existential. So spatially, when we're talking about landscapes, how people recognize them, how they may define them spatially. They may talk about distances, they may talk about, what lies in between certain aspects of the landscape, but it may also be sensory based. People may talk about colors, processes, sound, smell, drawing on the body of work in psychogeography, um, and the way that people, associate their identity with landscape. Existential is more about, again, it is about identity, but it's about our sense of belonging, our purpose in the world, the meaning that our life brings to the world and vice versa, and our positionality within that. And it also leads us to think about landscapes from the point of view of memory, association, and meaning. Um, Personal, this very personal, unique view that we talked about earlier that we have of landscapes, which is as unique as our DNA. It may be linked to biographical events, um, maybe even autobiographical events, um, things that we've experienced when we're younger. Childhood memories are very, very powerful. Generally, it's accepted that we don't really have our own memories until we're about 3 or 4, that because of what's sometimes called childhood amnesia or infantile amnesia, memories, we're not capable of really developing our own independent memories until we reach a certain age. So memories that we have before then are ones that we've inherited, that people have told us about, and sometimes it's difficult to differentiate between what's real and what's imagined, what's been recounted back to us. Cultural memory, cultural memory in relation to landscape talks about the kind of wider meanings that people within a community or in a given setting have attributed to the landscape. And this may be things like, memorials that may have been put up in honor of certain people or certain events. There's generally a consensus, a shared narrative on what these cultural landscapes are like. But do bear in mind, of course, that they're invariably subjective and often driven by ideological goals. Perpetuating landscapes, the landscape of the mind is one such obvious example. They are never finished, ready to be read or visualized. Um, and that, the interaction between landscape, place, and people is something which is underpinned by a continuing dynamic. So just to conclude, landscapes are multifaceted. Landscape is a multidisciplinary concept. It does shift over time. Some of the key theoretical constructs that we've covered here, including particularly the typology of landscapes, will hopefully be useful to you, especially if you're thinking of considering landscapes as your chosen place type for the literature review for this module and the accompanying case study, which we'll be doing next year. So do begin to think about, the relevance and how it may apply to you instrumentally as well as more intellectually. And I think just finally, just to say, do allow yourself to, immerse yourself in the wonders of landscape. There's something I think that's very positive for our physical and mental well-being to just sometimes just stand in awe and just look at some of the things that we see in the world. Often, life, you know, takes a very fast pace and we don't allow ourselves the luxury to do that. But when we do it and we just sit and pause, and really, it can be, a rural landscape, or it could be an urban landscape, really look really carefully at what you're seeing, and just give yourself time to just, to think of, just how incredible it is. And I think that's sometimes we don't do that often enough. And certainly, if you're anything like me, as lockdown goes on, it seems to have a very positive effect to take a step back and just really embrace the surroundings in which we find ourselves, or alternatively, seek ones out that you really love. So, so that's about it, I think, for the moment. So I look forward to seeing everyone in the seminar, where we will be focusing on Achill Island as landscape, and I look forward to sharing those materials with you. So uh, between now and then, take good care, everyone, and look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye for now.